Welcome to the Healthy Skin Show with Jennifer Fugo, where we're flipping everything you've been told about your chronic skin issues upside down and connecting you with alternative solutions your dermatologist never told you about.
Welcome back to episode number 267 of the Healthy Skin Show. In today's episode, I want to answer a very common listener question about eczema triggering foods. Almost weekly, I am asked for a list of foods that could possibly worsen eczema symptoms or at the least cause a rash to flare up. Just yesterday, I was asked to talk about sugar and alcohol as potential trigger foods in my Instagram messages. While I'd love to do a solo episode on individual foods and atopic dermatitis, I can tell you right now that the answer would be rather redundant, which is why I figured I'd set the record straight in this episode. I've covered several food chemical triggers on the podcast before, such as the concern about salicylates in episode 97 and nightshades in a lengthy article that you can find on skinterrupt.com, which I will link to in the show notes. Now, you can also find information on nickel allergy and diet concerns in episode 37 with Dr. Peter Leo, as well as another article on the site, which again, I'll link up in the show notes. And I've also discussed histamine at length, which clearly has diet implications in a two-part series found in episodes 188 and 192. Now, despite all of this, I still get questions about whether various foods could be triggers, which underscores just how oriented we've become to believe that food is the biggest problem facing eczema these days, thanks to loads of misinformation shared online and in popular books on the topic. The most troubling part of this all is this narrative that pits you against food, aka nourishment, friends, which is on many levels potentially harmful. We now have newer research demonstrating the physical and mental consequences that unnecessary diet restrictions cause that should be seen as a wake-up call about how we view food in terms of eczema. And I promise I will share more about this in a future episode. For now, let's talk about if there's an actual eczema trigger food list. Because if you look that up on Google, you will find many articles that cite different foods as eczema trigger foods. And I also get emails weekly, if not sometimes daily, questions like, where can I find a list of eczema trigger foods on your website? Or, do you have a podcast where you talk about which foods are inflammatory for eczema? Some people also will ask me, can you tell me why I flare up when I eat X food? And these are just a few variations of the many questions that I get from listeners who are motivated to figure out what's driving their rashes so they can get some relief. And I completely understand. While food may play some part in rash flare-ups, assuming we're not dealing with an IgE food allergy, there is a bigger reason that you can end up feeling like certain foods make your rashes worse. And to be honest, it's very difficult for you to sort that out because what I'm about to share isn't discussed on blogs and in eczema diet books. And that said, I think it bears stating that there is no official list of eczema trigger foods, no matter what research you have done online. Some foods may be a problem for some people, but they also may be tolerated perfectly fine by others. And eggs and citrus are both examples of this. They are not universal eczema trigger foods, despite what you read. Unless you're dealing with an IgE allergy, the reason you react to certain foods is likely due to gut function and gut microbiome imbalances. So let's unpack these both separately to make this whole thing, which is confusing by the way, a little easier for you to understand. When I talk about the gut, I make a point to differentiate between gut function and your gut microbiome because while they are certainly connected, they're also separate issues. Gut function refers to the process of chewing and then digesting food to extract nutrition, which is then absorbed. This would also encompass stomach acid production, enzyme secretion, short-chain fatty acid levels, and other hormones and factors associated with this process. A second part of gut function is gut motility, meaning how quickly or slowly things move through your GI tract. And this can be impacted by a litany of issues, including hydration, gut microbiome issues, stress response, and vagal nerve imbalances. And then we've got to consider gut permeability and immune function within the GI tract. Your gut, by the way, is literally one cell layer thick, coated by a mucosal lining that's meant to keep what's inside your gut, like food particles and gut bugs, inside that gut tube, away from mingling with those gut cells and away from cellular junctions. This episode is brought to you by my skincare line, DermaQuell. The beauty of these skincare products are that they are especially crafted for those struggling with chronic skin rash issues based on my research and clinical experience from my private practice. They focus on organic ingredients that are clean like zinc, aloe, and hemp oil that support and calm rashed, dry, angry skin. There's no unnecessary chemicals or additives that can further dry out your skin or mess with your hormones. And I'm so excited for you to add these creams into your routine. Check them out at quellshop.com and use the coupon code GET15OFF to get 15% off your first order. I'll put a link in the description below, and now let's jump back to the video. Basically, what's inside your gut tube should generally stay there unless it's appropriately digested and absorbed by your cells. To be honest, this is an extremely simplified overview for the sake of time. And it kind of follows in line with my intention to help listeners have a basic understanding of what's going on. This is not meant to be an exact representation because it's so much more complex. Now, I'm sharing all of this because when any part of gut function is compromised, we have a major problem because there are no backup systems in the GI tract when it comes to gut function. Typically, when there's a gut function issue further upstream, such as low stomach acid, for example, other issues will ensue further downstream. When there are gut function issues, the way that food will interact with your gut will likely be problematic and absolutely can contribute to a flare-up in symptoms. And in my experience, it is highly common for chronic eczema cases to have some gut function issues lurking under the surface. And when there are those gut function issues present, whether you have IBS or you poop like a champ and have no GI issues to speak of, because you can have hidden issues, friends, there is commonly some sort of gut microbiome issue also lurking, though the extent of the imbalance will depend upon a variety of factors that will differ from case to case. I started to discuss this in last week's episode on the Eczema Gut Connection Part 1, where I discussed imbalances with commensal gut bacteria. However, opportunistic commensal organisms like Candida albicans and truly unfriendly or pathogenic organisms can also gain access to your GI tract. These organisms can produce waste products because, everything poops, and those waste products trigger your body. They are inflammatory, and they can also overwhelm your phase 2 liver detox pathways, which I talk extensively about in episode 177. Either way, the makeup of your gut microbiome is equally important to what's going on in the gut in terms of gut function. And I say this because what we often perceive as reactions to food are more commonly an inappropriate reaction between the food and the gut, either due to compromised gut function and or microbiome imbalances. Now, I certainly understand that it's easy to assign blame after experiencing a flare-up after eating a specific food. You know what the input was, food. And you also know what the ultimate outcome was, a flare. What you don't know is what happened once the food was swallowed. And that's where things become a bit trickier and more difficult to suss out. Since we're so used to hearing endlessly about leaky gut and food sensitivities, that's the first place where everyone's mind runs. As a clinical nutritionist who works with eczema clients, I know that the answer here isn't so black and white, and it underscores why I prefer to clearly explain to my clients what's going on. I don't want clients or even you to walk away from this conversation blaming food when it really wasn't the food's fault. Here's a great example. If you have low stomach acid because of a hidden H. pylori infection in your stomach, you'll likely fail to break down protein sufficiently, which means that the amount of amino acids that your body will actually absorb is less than what it should be. And those proteins, which did not fully digest, they are considered partially undigested proteins, travel further downstream to the colon, where they shouldn't be, by the way, and end up getting fermented by gut bugs. This process of gut bugs fermenting protein is known as putrefaction, and is clearly not normal since your gut flora should ferment fiber. And this can cause a flare-up because the products of putrefaction are inflammatory. So if you were to blame the chicken or the egg or the steak or something else very protein dense for why you're having a flare, in this particular example, it would be incredibly short-sighted because those foods are not actually the problem, meaning it's not that food's fault. It's the issues going on in the GI tract causing this type of inappropriate reaction. So rather than jumping to blaming food, I love to ask the question when someone says they're having various reactions. I like to ask why. Why is this happening? And then seek the answers from there. Oftentimes, reactions to foods are trying to point us to a problem. But if you don't know how to translate the information, I can most certainly understand why it's just as easy to blame it on the food. This all said, I do want to clarify that gut problems are not the only reason that you could have chronic atopic dermatitis or flare-ups. I shared in episode 53 about the 16 different root causes of eczema and other chronic skin issues, where food and diet are only one of the potential issues. You can actually go through the entire process of determining which root causes are a problem for you in my free guide that walks you through this process, and I will link to that in the show notes. Now, if you've got any questions or thoughts to share about this, head on over to skinterrupt.com/267 so we can keep the conversation going. And then take a moment to share this episode with fellow eczema warriors who may be thinking that food is their big culprit and perhaps are in need of a different perspective about what could be going on. And then take that moment to rate and review the Healthy Skin Show if you haven't done so yet, and hit that subscribe button so you can tune in each week for new research, tips, various alternative strategies, and even that inspiration that you need to help you rebuild healthy skin. And then let's connect. I'm at Jennifer Fugo over on Instagram. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to diving deeper with you in the next episode.